Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the CalSTRS Employer Advisory Committee meeting. I'm Kimberly Petz. I'm one of the assistant directors in Member Account Services, and I'll be helping to facilitate this meeting with Diane Stanton. Diane?
And hi, everyone. Diane Stanton, Director of External Affairs at CalSTRS. Happy to be with you again for another conversation. We have again made some changes to EAC. Hopefully, this is to improve the conversation and the dialogue. So we've brought everybody into Zoom. We're not doing the live stream and and forcing folks to email questions into us. That was a little awkward in May. So again, folks are still able to email questions into us at advisorycommittee.calstrs.com. But while this is a Zoom conversation, this isn't what we would call, or maybe is going to be a new term of art, your normal Zoom. We've added some features and functions to this, which we also wanted to share and go over with you. There will be no video for those that are participating. So at no point are we going to turn on a video and you're going to get photo blasted all over this meeting. That's a video option that's just for the CalSTRS staff that are going to be facilitating the dialogue today. We've also disconnected the chat feature, so there's no way to chat. But if you do have questions for us, you can also, through the Zoom function, along the menu options at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. Using that Q&A button, you can type in questions to us. We have subject matter experts that have also joined our presenters today, and they can also help facilitate and answer questions as we go through this. We will also be pausing frequently so that folks have opportunity to ask questions. Again, if you would like to ask a question, please, again, using the menu at the bottom of your screen, under participants, you'll see an option to raise your hand, at which point we will unmute your microphone. Again, no video, but we will unmute you so that you'll be able to engage in a conversation and a dialogue with the presenter or the subject matter expert, as the case may be. So I think that's the instructions that we wanted to go over. Kim, am I missing anything? I'll hand it to you.
No, I think we're good. And this is new for all of us too. So please be patient as we navigate this with you. I do have one announcement before we pass it on to our first presenter. In Member Account Services, we have filled our vacant position that was vacated by Rita Good with our very own Kathleen Arceo. So she will be my counterpart in these meetings in the future, along with Diane. And she will be the assistant director over our employer services and training section. So I want to welcome her to the meeting, but she is well versed in member account services, having served CalSTRS in member account services for quite some time. So welcome to Kathleen. And with that, we will move on to our very first presenter. If you could advance the slide. And there we go. So that's the agenda. And Joycelyn will be our first presenter.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here. I'm sorry I can't see you, but I'm glad that we'll be able to have this format. So I'm going to go over the legislative update. The legislature is back in session. They've been sort of touch and go because of the pandemic, but they are having committee hearings. Things are very truncated at this point in time. They're trying to only have one hearing in each house to hear bills that came from the opposite house. So we will see how things wrap up this year, but I'm going to go ahead and give you an update on the CalSTRS related bills. And I think in May, I was able to update you that most of our sponsored bills weren't able to move forward because of the pandemic and the focus on COVID-19 related bills and other things like that were really the focus of the economy and such. We did have AB 2219, our CalSTRS IRA bill. It did move out of its first policy committee, the Assembly Public Employment and Retirement Committee. And then the author decided not to move forward with it. So we'll continue to work on that issue next year, but that bill's not moving. And I do want to point out that some of the materials received I did include the legislative matrix so you can kind of see where all of the bills ended up. So that's noted on there. I think the biggest news I have for you is that our housekeeping bill, SB 993, did remain in its original committee and wasn't able to move forward. But what has happened now is that there's kind of a mega bill, I'm calling it. But AB 2101, which is a Assembly Public Employment and Retirement Committee bill, it was the CalPERS housekeeping bill that now has our housekeeping provisions in it, as well as the county system's housekeeping provisions in it. So it's all three, those main systems have all of their housekeeping provisions. So it has everything from SB 993 plus the amendments that we went over last time in our May meeting. And so if you want to take a look at that, it's of course available on the legislative website. I did include in the materials our analysis of AB 2101, so you can read through all of the provisions there. It's actually being heard this afternoon at 1:30 in the Senate Labor, Public Employment and Retirement Committee. So we'll see if it's able to move on. Should be non-controversial. No opposition has been raised. And if something happens in this end of session because of tight timelines and too many things going on and it happens to not move forward, we'll work on these provisions again next year in our annual housekeeping bill. So that's the updates I have on this year's legislation. So I'm going to see if there's any questions by people that have their hands raised at this point in time. See that Lucinda Papani has her hand raised. I think it's been raised for a little bit, but is this a question about legislation? Okay. Anybody else want to raise their hand? And I don't see, the next place I'll go is to the Q&A. I don't see anything there either. And I'll just check in to see if anybody has an email that's come in.
No email.
Thank you very much. So the next thing I wanted to let you all know, we are working on proposals for 2021. So we get started on that process pretty early. I want to kind of give you a summary of something we're looking at, and I plan to come back to you with more detail next time we meet. But we are working on our statute of limitations and seeing how we can improve that, kind of follow what other systems are doing, have some alignment and equity and treatment for our members. And we're considering aligning our timelines for those statute of limitations. So this is if there's been an overpayment to a member, and it could have been found through an audit, it could have been something else. But if we're collecting that overpayment back, there is a statute of limitations on when we need to get that started in order to complete that collection. So we're looking at aligning our timelines more with what CalPERS has in their statute. So you're probably familiar with that. And for example, for CalPERS, if there's an employer error that caused that overpayment, then, and it's employer error in reporting, then or CalPERS sees that, they would collect the most recent 3 years of that overpayment from the member, and then the balance is collected from the employer. So that's also how it works in our law. If it's a CalSTRS error, we collect the most recent 3 years from the member, and then essentially we write off the balance, which is like CalSTRS paying for it. And so we are looking at, again, from that perspective on the employer side of things, we would be changing our statute to kind of match up is the proposal we're looking at. And right now what would happen is if we meet the certain timelines in our statute, we can collect the whole amount from the member. But we want to line up with what we do for CalSTRS error and kind of how CalPERS approaches the whole process. So it's something we're exploring with stakeholders and we're working on internally. And we would be, if we're going to move forward with it, we also have to work with our executive staff, but if they give us permission to move forward with it, we'd be going to the board in November, but we'd also be bringing back more detail at that point in time to you to that next EAC meeting so we can get your input, but we'll be meeting with other employer groups along the way. So I want to see if there's any questions on the proposal. That's, I think, the main proposal we're working on at this point in time, the only substantive one. And we may have additional housekeeping issues that we'll be addressing next year, especially if AB 2101 gets stuck. But you'll be super familiar with all the ones from this year. But I'll stop again for questions on that. Anybody wants to?
Thanks, Joycelyn. I know we've been monitoring both the Q&A. Okay. We also have some folks on the phone, but don't see any hand raised. So,
and I'll just say that's the last update I had at this point in time. I will need to probably leave the meeting to go to that hearing this afternoon. So John Meredith Simkowick is also on the line. So he can help answer questions toward the end if necessary. But I do see some Q&As that are popping up.
Yeah, they would like you to repeat the current process and the proposed process because there's an echo.
Oh, no. Sorry about that. And then the other question is, you were referring to retired benefit checks where the employer overpaid earnings. So, okay, so let me start with that one, I think, because this is where if reporting kind of overstated something that, or ends up in the benefit as overstating it, so they got a higher benefit than they were actually supposed to, and then it's re-reported to correct that error. And so now the member received too much money in their first, chunk of benefit checks. And so now I have to repay that amount. That's what we're talking about here. So I hope that answers the question from Dory Perrin. And then the other question, sure, the current process when there's an employer error is that if we start collection within a certain time frame, we collect the entire amount from the member. But to align with what we do for CalSTRS error and how CalPERS approaches the process, we would be collecting the most recent 3 years of overpayments from the member and the balance then from the employer. Okay. So hopefully there was less echo that time.
it looks like we've got the questions taken care of. I don't see any hand raised.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Great.
So I think we're good to move on to John's presentation and regulations update.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm John Meredith Simkowick with Governmental Relations. I'm here to give an update on the our regulations that are moving through right now. Current regulations that are actually already in the process. We have public comment for our board meetings. We have some regulations related to the public comment period for how our board conducts public comment period at the board meeting. We received comments on those public comment regulations, and we'll be bringing those back to the board in November is the plan for that. Then we also have in March, we went to the board and asked for permission to move forward with regulations regarding our employer audit appeals. And the basic reason for this package was that staff has recognized there's been this issue that we've recognized where under our current regulatory framework, we cannot provide any appeals to members who are affected by a systemic audit finding. So, and it's just because of the timeframes of how our process works, where members who are part of a sample in the audit, which we know, so our auditors have sampled the population, we know those numbers, we provide them appeal rights, but because the systemic population comes in after the timeframes that afford those appeal rights, we can't provide those members who have been part of a systemic finding, the population that employers then identify after an audit with the same appeal rights. So what we are aiming to do, and the board gave us permission to move forward with drafting regulations to provide for a consistent application of our process and of those appeal rights to all members affected, not just members of the sample population. So all members affected by an audit finding would be provided with appeal rights. The regulation goes into a lot more detail and process. And so we posted, I believe, on the website, a description of our current process and then the proposed regulations and where the process is the process would change. So I'll just go over that in a high level. And the first part is that under current process, as I mentioned, the sample population is provided the draft audit report and the final audit report, sampled members. This new process, the audit process itself is between CalSTRS and the employer, and so we would be providing the draft audit or preliminary audit to the employer only, just as we currently do, but not to the sampled. And then also for the final audit report, we would be providing that to the employer only. That then would kick off an audit resolution period, in which we would like to, the idea would be we would collaborate with the employer to first ask the employer to submit a list of all members affected by an audit finding so that we can know who everybody is. And then to make all the corrections. And it would be, the proposed would be a 6-month period of time where CalSTRS audit resolution team would work with employers to both identify those members and get the corrections in. After that period, then we would issue what we would call an audit determination. And it's the determination which would then provide the appeal rights for both the employer and all members affected, not just the sampled members. So all members affected would get this determination letter from CalSTRS and would kick off a 90-day period of time in which to appeal the audit finding and whether or not they should be included in the audit finding. The other really significant part is that recognizing that sometimes it can take years to get these corrections in, and that isn't good for the system or for members or anybody. We want to be paying accurate benefits as soon as possible. And so once we conclude an audit, we want to get those corrections in as soon as possible. So in recognizing that, we're collaborating, we're really working with employers, but at the end of the 6-month period, if the corrections or the list has not come in with regards to a systemic audit, the proposal is that we would actually start a penalty. There would be a penalty that would start accruing on an employer who would have to pay that penalty for any corrections that have not come in or if we have not been notified of the systemic population. And at the end of the day, if after that time there's a correction that does come in later on, we've already afforded the appeal rights to the members, all the members that we've known about, but the ones that we haven't known about would still need appeal rights. And so in processing that appeal, the proposal would be to actually penalize the employer for the cost of that appeal, that late appeal, because we didn't get that information in in a timely manner. And so then we had to process go through another round of appeals for the same issue that we may have already done some appeals on earlier. And the appeals themselves, what we would be able to do is CalSTRS would be able to basically group the appeals having to do with one finding into sort of a class, and that would be able to move that class, that grouping along in the process a lot more efficiently. This is just a proposal right now. We're working with stakeholders, with employer groups, just like Joycelyn mentioned. We'd be working with employer stakeholder groups as well on the statute of limitations proposal. This is also something that we are still, we're having lots of conversations with different stakeholder groups, both on the member side and the employer side. And so this is most likely probably going to change slightly. There's internal discussions, so it's just very much we're just in the process, the drafting process of this. I think we would like to be able to have something all ironed up by November. So that's what our hope is. But again, we know that there's a lot of things going on, and so we're just working towards that. A lot of conversations right now. So I do see it looks like a Q&A question. So yes, it would not be retroactive. It would be going forward. It would be the intention, I believe, for any. I don't know exactly what will end up, but it would. I think the concept would be for audit findings that are in the future, that are audits that are issued in the future. So not going backward, only going forward would be the answer to that one. Any other questions in any other area? You're welcome.
I think this Q&A feature is working a little bit better than waiting for emails to come in. But again, to remind folks that are listening, if it's easier to email a question to us, we can take that too. Thank you, John. I appreciate your time on that. I also wanted to mention to folks that there will be a conversation in the September board meeting in the audits committee itself that goes through the audit process, and will also, so it will be a good tutorial and a good overview that helps put some of the regulatory changes that the governmental relations team are working on to help put some context to that. Historically, the CalSTRS board meetings do not live stream appeals committee, but for the purposes of these educational items on the agenda, we will be streaming the meeting again, just for folks to have greater awareness and greater participation in the process. And the September board meeting is currently scheduled for September 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And at this time, I don't know specifically when appeals will be meeting, but we can certainly keep everyone apprised of that. And it looks like we may have a raised hand. So John, please stand by.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yes. So my question is, potentially an employer may have to pay penalties for corrections needed if something found in an audit, but there also might be a penalty for the appeals, right? So there's more than just the P&I penalties?
Yeah, it's actually, we're talking about potentially two other penalties. So penalties and interest, it's the current way it works, and nothing would change on penalties and interest. So any late contributions or late adjustments would be penalized according to those current regulations and penalties and interest. What you all know is penalties and interest. Under the proposed regulations that we've been mulling about, we're considering the idea of penalizing for following a 6-month resolution period, if it's not resolved, if the corrections are not made, then there would be an additional penalty at that time. And then if after that there's a request for an administrative hearing, an appeal related to ones that were not corrected during that time, because we were able to group all of the others and move them along through the process after the resolution period, that would be an extra cost to CalSTRS. So there'd be another penalty for that cost of that hearing that CalSTRS would have to adjudicate. We wouldn't adjudicate it, but we would work with the Administrative Law, Office of Administrative Law to adjudicate.
And the assessment of that penalty would it be like a flat amount or more like the P&I based on time and interest rates and things like that?
So the first penalty that would occur, if we didn't get the corrections in, that would be, I believe, more of a time base. It would be the longer it took, the higher that penalty would be. For the appeal, for the cost of the appeal, to process the appeal that CalSTRS would have to undertake, we're looking at probably a flat dollar amount for that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And if there are no other questions, is my right on that? Okay, so I'll toss it back over to Joycelyn then for a budget update. Thank you, everybody.
Excellent. I'm back for the impact of the 2020-21 California budget. And so I'll go through all the slides, and then I can stop for questions after I talk about the employer rate and then after the state rate. So next slide, please. So there's quite a bit that happened in the budget that just started on July 1st, but of course all the machinations in May and June. This is a comparison table, so you can see what was planned in 2019-20 versus what's happening right now. At that point in time, the state provided funding to lower the rates in 2019-20 and 2020-21, so last year and this fiscal year. So that's the short-term rate relief of the $606 million. And so that is why you saw lower rates over last year and then this year. That was what was planned. And then the $1.64 billion was long-term rate relief, which would have slightly lowered the contribution rate over the life of the funding plan, so through 2046. But this year, given everything that's happened, the proposal was, and what made it through, was to use those funds that were for long-term rate relief instead to offset the employer rate even more. So you can see that now the total of the $2.246 billion was all used for short-term rate relief, and that did extend it one more fiscal year, so through 2021-22. So next fiscal year, you'll also see some rate relief on the employer contribution side. So if we could go to the next slide, I can kind of talk through this. It'll show you what was kind of planned with the 1920 budget. That's the red line for the 2019 valuation versus the blue line, which is where we are today. And so prior to this year's budget, you were going to see the rate increase in this year to 18.4%. And then you would have seen it kind of go down to around a little less than 18% on the red line. That's kind of the long-term rate relief you were seeing with that the $1.64 billion. But now with the blue line, with this year's budget, you can see that for the current fiscal year we're in, 2021, it drops down to the 16.15%. And then you see it drop down a little further in 21-22. So that's the first year the board will have the authority to change employer contribution rates. So the projection right now is that they'll set it at about 18%-ish. And then what the budget said was that whatever employers pay directly will be let me get the number right. I think it's 2.18% less than that. Yes. So it'll be around 16% because it depends on what rate the board sets. So you see it dip a bit more. And then going forward, starting in 2022-23, it does go back up to close to 18%. So it's just this year and next fiscal year, the additional years of rate relief for employers. And then you see it pop back up to about that 18%. And again, it's a little bit higher than the red line because that long-term, the dedication of funds to the long-term rate relief has gone away. So that's the difference between those two lines. I'm going to stop there real quick for questions on the employer contribution rate. And then we have a question, the follow-up question for John, but I wonder if I should just finish up this presentation and maybe we can go back to John. Perfect. Okay. And that's the employer contribution rate. So I'm going to move on to the state contribution rate. So next slide, please. So, and this is kind of interesting because the board has had kind of some minimal rate setting authority for the state contribution rate for a few years now. The maximum they can increase it is 0.5%. And the board actually did do that at their May board meeting. So you can see that the 1920 contribution rate was 7.828%. And the board actually said that for this fiscal year that we're in now, we needed 0.5% more. That's to get to our full funding at the end of the funding plan. So that was the plan going forward. But what happened in the budget is that the language in the law now says we're freezing the board's rate setting authority. So you don't get to add on that 0.5%. You only get the 7.828%. And that would leave a shortfall of that $170 million. But what was also planned by the state is to cover that difference with revenues from Proposition 2. And so the state actually has already contributed $297 million for that state portion of the unfunded. That's already come in on July 1st. And as you can tell, it more than covers what that shortfall would have been. And so they're sort of pre-funding, which allows us to invest the funds and be in a better position going forward. But without having a catch-up provision, you see that at the bottom, it slightly weakens the funding plan. And what we mean by that is that if the board gets their rate setting authority back in the following for next fiscal year, and we start off at 7.828%, we're kind of 5.5% behind. So we actually probably need to increase it by 1%. But there isn't any language in the law right now that would allow us to do it. So we'd be running a little bit behind. So I'm going to ask to go to the next slide. And you can see here where we thought we would be again in 1920 with the 2019 valuation, the red line versus the blue line, which is where we are now. You can kind of see the little blue triangle there. So that's where the Prop 2 funds made up the difference. So the rate was kept the same from 1920 to 2021. And then we anticipate it to continue to go up 0.5% for those 3 years where you see the slope up, but it's a little bit below, that's the 0.5% where it needed to be with the red line. And so in the end, that may mean the state rate has to continue on at a higher amount. As you can see, the blue line goes over the red line through the life of the funding plan. So that's what happened on the state contribution side. And of course, this is projected because the board, will be considering what they need to get to the end of that funding plan. And those amounts could change a little bit based on experiences. And again, like I mentioned on the employer side, it's projected to be about 18%. These things are affected by investment returns and by payroll. The state's rate is more affected by investment volatility. I'll just remind you of that. The employer rate is more affected by payroll. And so I'll go to the last slide then. And so just to reassure everyone, where we stand today is that there's no short-term impact to the funding plan. The lack of the catch-up provision, like we talked about, just slightly weakens the plan long-term. And we do see that risk increase, though, if the board's authority is frozen for longer and there is no catch-up provision, again, like I said, to make up any difference between what the board would have increased the state rate by versus what it's actually held at. And so that's basically the impact on the contribution rates from the state budget this year. So any questions on that? Okay. Thank you. So I think we'll go back to John for the question that was sent through on the regulations.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. I was trying to learn how to answer it in the Q&A, and I was actually I finally figured it out, and I was going to do that right now. But the question had to do with whether or not there would be on the regulations for the employer audit appeals. During the 6-month period, people would be required to submit corrections for systemic findings, and some of those could be over multi-year systemic corrections. From Talina or Nelas in Los Angeles County Office of Education, she is indicated that could take a lot longer than 6 months in certain situations for multi-year systemic findings, and if that would be taken into consideration before employers are assessed penalties. And the proposed regulations as we have drafted them and as we're working with them right now would not contemplate any different period for multi-year systemic corrections, but it's helpful information, Talina, and we will take that back and think about that, and we'll talk with our employer services people and audit resolution team to kind of understand more about how that might impact probably especially larger employers as well. So thank you very much. We really appreciate the feedback, and we'll consider that question seriously.
Thank you, John. Okay, so we've moved through legislative update, regulations. Again, more information in detail to help put those regulations related to the audit and appeals process. Again, will be presented at our appeals committee in September. So we would encourage folks to view that presentation the first week of September. And with that, I'm not seeing any additional questions or hands raised. So I think we're ready for John Hammond, our second John of the afternoon, for a pension solution update.
Great. Thank you, Diane. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm John Hammond with the Employer Readiness Team for a pension solution update for you. Next slide. Despite all the challenges we are faced with in the world today, the new secure employer website, also known as SEW, is still scheduled to implement in fall of 2021. If you look at the slide, you'll see a schedule that will be familiar to some of you. And we have indicated today with "you are here" in case you didn't know where you were. As you can see on the schedule, we're close to implementing a maintenance release into the testing environment, and we'll be providing more specific details on the release on the Employer Support Portal website and the Employer Readiness environment. Additionally, we have successfully transitioned our in-person readiness visits to virtual visits online via Zoom. In the virtual visits, we still provide a personal approach to introducing you to the testing environment and the tools available to support your transition to the new SO. To date, we've met with approximately 50% of the report sources with a goal of meeting with all report sources by March of next year. So if you have not scheduled a readiness visit with the Employer Readiness team yet, please reach out to us at psemployerreadiness@calstrs.com. I will pause here just for a second to see if there's any schedule or readiness visit questions at this time. Okay, well, I will keep moving on. Next slide. So this is also a familiar slide to some of you. It communicates some of the training support that we have available. I specifically want to remind you about the 24 computer-based training opportunities, also known as CBTs, accessible through the Employer Support Portal. CBTs are strongly encouraged for employers that are planning to use the new SO at Go Live in fall of 2021. The CBTs cover a lot of material in a short amount of time and will answer most of your system questions. These CBTs are available to all your staff and your dependent organizations like districts and community colleges, charters, etc., that will use the new SO in the future. And like I said, they're available to you right now through the Employer Support Portal. If you're looking for something more personal, interactive training opportunities can be requested through your employer services representative. If after completing the CBTs, you feel that you need further training for your staff or your dependent organizations, contact your ES rep and let them know that you would like to submit a training request. They are trained to receive that information from you. But a quick caveat here, we highly recommend completing the CBTs before requesting interactive training in order to become more familiar with the new system and to help you better understand your training needs. I will pause here for just a second if there's any training questions. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide, please. Although we are working from home, we are still available to support you. Please reach out if you need any assistance. Once again, for scheduling a readiness visit, contact the Employer Readiness team at the email on the slide. And for testing support, contact your employer services representative. And I will take one more pause for any general project questions that you might have. This is my last slide, so just fair warning, I'm about to hand it over. So if there's any questions, now's a great time to ask that.
You might get off lucky today, John.
Okay, well, that's okay with me. Hey, thanks, everyone. Next on the agenda is Kim and Diane for Open Forum. So Diane, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. And actually, John brought up a really good point, which is a good reminder for everyone, that CalSTRS is continuing to work from home, that our headquarters and our member service centers remain closed to guests and visitors, and employee access is minimal because we are able to continue to operate in an environment at home that keeps everyone safe and healthy. But again, we are, I think Kim and I really want to reiterate that we still are here and available to answer questions, whether that's through email, phone calls, and otherwise. So just because we may not be working in our traditional place of work, it doesn't mean that services are being interrupted, delayed, slowed. There is the full expectation that we will be able to continue to provide services, albeit slightly differently. And I think The EAC is another example of how we've had to make changes and modifications. But again, continue to want to make ourselves available as we continue to navigate this very unique environment that we're all operating in.
Exactly, Diane. And all of your employer services reps and training reps are available to you with absolutely the same level of customer service that we have always offered to all of you. Before we actually get into the open forum, I imagine that there are some questions that I'm hoping are going to be answered by our very own Nicole Snyder with a quick update for you all as well before we actually open everything up.
Hello, everybody. I'm the very own Nicole Snyder. Just kidding. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nicole Snyder. I'm one of the managers in Member Account Services. And so I just wanted to touch on a couple of things today that were brought up at the last couple of EACs. So wanted to give some clarification. The specific one is around the taking of training. So I think this subject was brought up at the February and the last one, the May EAC. And some questions were coming up around the taking of training and whether or not that was creditable. And at February and in May, we talked about how the taking of training itself was not creditable service. The clarification that I want to make here is that it is creditable service when it comes to the point of it being the work of a teacher or the work of a librarian, the work of a counselor, normal part of their everyday duties. So we just wanted to clarify that you know the PDD days or those in-service training days that are usually part of the contracted base hours, the full-time contracted base hours. That are incorporated into the full-time contracted salary. That is creditable. It is reportable to CalSTRS. Generally, we probably wouldn't see it called out any other way in the reporting other than just it being part of a regular full-time line. So just wanted to clarify that particular piece. So that's when it comes to those contracted days. We know that some of the questions that have come through are about additional training days. We've heard a lot recently because of COVID that a lot of school districts are looking at adding days so that their staff can learn how to do more with online learning. And so we've been getting a lot of questions around those types of trainings that are being taken that are kind of like outside of the full-time day. So again, want to reiterate that we do consider that taking of the training to be creditable as part of the work of the teacher, counselor, just like that. So in those cases, what we're really going to be looking at is the compensation itself. And just like anything else, we always need to evaluate whether the compensation it meets our definition of creditable compensation and the regulations that are associated with that. So that's where we hang our hat with that. So if you do have questions about these kind of ad hoc trainings that are being paid off salary schedule, or maybe as like a one-time stipend, please reach out to us and we'll help navigate and figure out whether or not it is creditable and how it should be reported if it is. So I'm going to take a quick pause here to see if there's any questions about that. I know we have some people on the phone, so if you need to, you can email at advisorycommittee@calstrs.com. Otherwise, I don't see any hands up, and I also don't see anything in the questions and answers, the Q&A portion, so I'm going to quickly move on. The other thing I just wanted to bring up is I know again that this was a question that came up at the last EAC was if we are planning on putting forth any kind of circular or directive around potential furloughs. I think Kim answered it last time. It was in this open forum session as well. And at that time, we hadn't planned on putting anything out just yet because we didn't know what the 2021 budget was going to look like. So now that we have that information, we are in the process of drafting a new circular around the concept of potential furloughs, or basically if your districts decide to bargain for a reduction in school funds during this time. We know that the state didn't mandate it, but we do know that that doesn't mean that at the bargaining table, you guys, the districts and the governing agencies can bargain for something like that. So we are looking at putting something out for that with very similar direction to the circulars that went out in, I believe, 2008 and 2009. So be on the lookout for that, but we will be putting something out. And with that, are there any questions? I'm not seeing any hands up, and I'm not seeing any Q&A. So maybe I get out of here a little bit lucky today too.
You may have just jinxed yourself.
I know. As soon as it was coming out of my mouth, I was like, "Jeez." Okay. Well,
we said we should just mic you, and now this is our opportunity to keep you mic'd. But we won't. We won't keep you. We won't.
I can always hop back in if there's a question that pops up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
All right, Kim.
All right, so we're ready for any other open forum questions, anything related to our presentations from today, or anything that you feel like hasn't been answered. We'll take those either by having you raise your hand or typing into the Q&A, or for those of you that are on the phone, sending that email to advisorycommittee@calstrs.com. And I don't currently see any Q&As or any raised hands.
It looks like it's a sizable group today, but it looks like a little bit quiet. So give folks a moment and fill some space by, again, just reiterating that CalSTRS staff is here for you, whether that's, we need to do workshops or training or presentations to the district or the county. Our member account services staff is here and available to help with that. If on the flip side as well, employees, whether they be new employees or they're employees that have questions about their CalSTRS retirement benefit, our retirement readiness team is also available to provide assistance to make sure that our educators understand the value and the benefit of CalSTRS and their pension. So we can take some of those more specific questions and help you better serve the staff. So again, I just wanted to make a plug for that.
Looks like we have a question in our Q&A, Diane.
All right.
And I'm actually going to, I'm going to tell Nicole she jinxed herself. Nicole, can you see the question in the Q&A, or do you need me to read it?
No, I can see it, and you're right. I totally jinxed myself. Okay, so the question for those of you, it says, for clarification on the training related to attending training while working from home or attending COVID-19 distance learning is not creditable or is now looked at on a case-by-case basis. So we would say that the taking of this training does meet our definition of creditable service. So what we need to now do is evaluate the compensation and how it's being paid to see if that should be reported or how it should be reported to CalSTRS. So as always, we like to look at things on a case-by-case basis. So it really does depend. And I mean, it is going to depend district by district. So what is the definition? Okay. Oh, sorry. Hold on. So I would say I didn't see who wrote that one in, so I apologize. I would say reach out to your employer services rep, and we can help get any clarification that we need to help direct you how to report. So Ramona, hi Ramona. I see that you're asking, what is the definition of creditable service? So creditable service is actually outlined in our TRL. It's 22119.5. Is it scary that I know that off the top of my head? I don't even have to look at the book anymore.
Say that one more time, a little bit slower.
Sorry, 22119.5. That's the law that specifically talks about the types of service that people are doing for the types of employers that would then be creditable here. So most of you are familiar with, I think 22119.5 B1 talks about the work of teachers is creditable. There's another section that talks about counselors, librarians, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we're looking at the taking of training is creditable under just the normal work of the employee that is performing creditable service at CalSTRS. Does that help, Ramona? I'm gonna assume it does. Tell me otherwise if it doesn't. Deepa, you have a question. What about faculty who conduct the trainings for other faculties? Is that also creditable as long as it's paid as part of their published salary schedule? So that's the slight nuance here. So we are looking at the taking of the taking of training to be creditable based on the work of teachers, like I said. The giving of training, the people who are conducting the training, that is creditable on its own based on 22119.5 B5. I'm pretty sure it's B5. So that is creditable on its own. That I would assume it would still be part of a published salary schedule. It potentially could be considered an additional assignment. And so, we would want to look at that to help guide you guys on how to report that to CalSTRS. Deepa, I hope that answered your question. Let me know if it didn't.
All right, any other questions? I don't see anything in our Q&A, and I don't see any raised hands. Thank you, Deepa. Deepa says yes, thank you.
Saw that. Thank you, Deepa.
And if you weren't comfortable having your question answered to the entire group, or you think of something later, please, again, you can always use that email address and we will make sure that your question gets sent to the appropriate person for outreach to you.
And again, that email address is advisorycommittee@calstrs.com. And again, we hope that this format, again, we're trying something again different. We again welcome feedback. Was this better, easier? I think it was. We weren't pausing as much, waiting for some questions to come in via email. So I think from that point of view, it was better. But again, to the extent that there were challenges related to, Zoom webinar style format, please, again, feel free to provide that feedback to us. We are trying to make improvements so that this is a good, valuable use of everyone's time. And so, again, to the extent that there are improvements needed, we will absolutely do what we can to bring those in. Okay, well, I see from Contra Costa County, they'd like the new format, so that's at least a ringing endorsement. Again, thank you, we appreciate hearing that. Again, we like I said, we want to make this a good use of everyone's time.
We're looking at also some potential to make it even more interactive in the future, so bear with us as we, learn the advances that the technology provides us, and right along with your teachers, we are figuring out the best ways to handle this. So we definitely appreciate your feedback, and if there's something that you're not getting or that you think we could be doing to better meet your needs, we would definitely.
Oh, Kim, it looks like you got muted a little bit at the end there. To Robin Wood's question about closed captioning, we do have a closed captioner that is following and tracking this conversation. When we post this conversation to be archived, to be a resource and a tool for future use and reference, it will include closed captioning. So while that's not necessarily part of today's ongoing dialogue, live dialogue, it is definitely something that will be available for the archive.
Yeah.
Great. Again, if folks would like to participate, we do also have not just the Q&A feature, but raising hand. As we heard a little bit earlier in this conversation, raise a hand and we can unmute folks. Oh, Nicole, calling Nicole. You're muted.
I was hitting the button. It wasn't doing it, apparently. Okay, let's see. Question for Nicole. Selena, we have a lot of districts inquiring about COVID-related expenses. Are these one-time payments to cover supplies, internet costs, considerations creditable? Can you please provide the ed code that relates to these items? Okay, so don't you love my answer? It depends. Again, we're going to have to evaluate what how the compensation is paid and what it's paid for. So for instance, I think you have in here like internet costs. If it's reimbursable, it's not creditable to CalSTRS. Bottom line is it has to meet our definition of creditable compensation. So we have to evaluate it for, is it either salary or remuneration in addition to salary? So the ed codes are 22119.2. So that's for the classic or the 2% at 60 members. The ed code for creditable compensation for the PEPRA members or 2% at 62 members is 22119.3. And for our 2% at 60 members, we also have the creditable compensation regulations. And I don't have those numbers aren't off the top of my head memorized, but I believe they start, it's creditable compensation starts with, it's
27400.
27200 is where it actually starts, but yes, 27400 is the regulation definition of salary. So that's where that starts. So salary and then remuneration in addition to. So again, if it is a one-time payment, that we would evaluate for that as well, or it's not even a one-time payment, limited term payment. So if it's something that maybe, staff are only getting for this year, it might be, we would probably look at it as a limited term payment, meaning that in those scenarios, it would more than likely be creditable straight to DBS for 2% at 60 members, not creditable for 2% at 62 members. But again, it's going to be as depends, and it's really going to be dependent on how each district bargains for this or pays for these things. So I know we say this a lot, but please feel free to reach out to your employer services representatives, and we will help walk you through and get the information that we need in order to help come to a conclusion on how and where that compensation should be creditable.
Thank you, Nicole.
You're welcome.
Please stand by.
On standby.
And I also wanted to bring to everyone's attention, I just learned something new in the middle of this webinar, which is we do have closed captioning, and it is available. And so if you, along, again, the menu screen at the lower edge, if you go to the More button with the three dots, the ellipses, there's hide subtitles, or show subtitles. That's where you'll see the closed captioning. And then right below that, there's an option to view the full transcript as well as close that transcript. And the transcript is a pop-up screen that will show up on your computer. So with that, we're all learning here. I like it. Great.
That's fantastic.
So I knew we had a captioner. Anyway.
So I don't see any other questions, Diane.
No, I'm not. We're not seeing anything come through. I'm not.
No raised hands.
I'm not seeing. There you go.
Yeah, we really appreciate your participation and taking the time to provide feedback and ask questions. That's what we're here for, is making sure that you guys can do your jobs as effectively and accurately as possible, and provide you the information in which to do that. So we really appreciate your attention and your time given to this meeting, and for providing us feedback. So again, if you have any other things that you'd like to talk to us about or provide feedback, that advisory committee at calstrs.com. And with that, I think we can say good afternoon.
And I think the other piece we just wanted to remind folks, if I remember correctly, so November 10th is our next scheduled EAC conversation and dialogue. That is the day before Veterans Day. Now, we were, when we were putting the calendar and the schedule together, working with our friends at CalSTRS, we were a little bit concerned with the scheduling right before a holiday. I think now, given the environment that we're working in and the concerns about traveling and not wanting to require or encourage that for participation, I think it's it'll be less of a conflict and less of a challenge for folks. But again, I did want to point out that the 10th is the day before Veterans Day. So, all right. Oh, looks like we have another question. Oh, great. Well, thank you. Glad this was helpful and informative. Again, feedback as far as time. Again, we're trying to keep these conversations to around 90 minutes. We are looking at breakout sessions to, again, get more of that interactive feel and function that Kim was referencing. So stay tuned for that improvement. Hopefully there was a nice break between the CalPERS portion, take some time, take a break, check email, maybe get a bite to eat before then joining the CalSTRS portion. If we need to make that break longer, we need to start later. If that 12:30 start, if a 1:30 start would be better, again, that feedback would be really appreciative as we look to scheduling the November 10th dialogue and the specific timing of that. So again, advisory committee at CalSTRS.com. So I'm feeling like we might be wrapping up here, Kim.
I think we're good, Diane.
All right.
So there is Lucinda is asking in 22119.2 and 0.3, which is 2% at 60 and which is 2% at 62. And I don't have my law book in front of me, and I bet you Nicole knows this off the top of her head.
I do. I was going to just type the answer, but 0.2 is for the 2 at 60. 0.3 is for 2 at 62.
Thank you, Nicole.
Okay, bye.
All right. Lucinda says thanks.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're wrapping up a little bit ahead of schedule today, but
Give you guys back some time for today, and we will see you at the very next one.
all right. Stay healthy, stay well, everybody, and we look forward to the conversation in November. Bye-bye.